It's wonderful to see you all again. I've got an extraordinary tale to tell you today.
Sloane Vance laughed as she tilted her glass, watching the chilled martini soak into the shoulder of Cassandra Vance's charcoal dress in front of the entire ballroom. The liquid was ice gold, a sharp contrast to the humid, floral-scented air of the Vance anniversary gala. Around them, the chatter of the city's elite faltered for a heartbeat, replaced by the rhythmic, predatory clicking of smartphone shutters. "Oh, Cassie," Sloane said, her voice pitched perfectly for her waiting live stream. She didn't reach out to help. Instead, she adjusted the heavy, gold-linked Versace belt cinching her waist, making sure her own logo-heavy ensemble was centered in the frame. "You always were so clumsy. You're practically invisible in that drab thing. I didn't even see you standing there. It's like you're trying to blend into the wallpaper." Cassandra didn't flinch. She felt the damp weight of the silk clinging to her skin, the expensive, unbranded fabric darkening to a bruised purple. She didn't wipe at the stain or offer a panicked apology. She simply stood, her posture a column of quiet steel, and watched her sister. Sloane was a riot of loud luxury, a walking billboard for every designer who would lend her a gown for a tag. Her perfume, an oversweet peony blend that cost $400 a bottle, filled the space between them, cloying and aggressive. She lived for these moments, the public display of dominance, the performance of being the golden child, while her older sister was relegated to the shadows of the family's tech empire. "Sloane, really," Eleanor Vance said, gliding over with Arthur Vance trailing in her wake. Her mother didn't look at the ruin of Cassandra's dress. Her eyes were fixed on the cameras. "The lighting is much better by the ice sculpture. Don't let a little spill ruin your mood. You have 3 million people waiting for your toast." Arthur cleared his throat, his eyes darting toward the high-status guests watching the exchange. "Cassandra, go find Marcus. He'll get you a towel in the kitchen. Try to stay out of the main hall until you've cleaned up. You're embarrassing your sister's broadcast." The dismissal was practiced, a jagged piece of family history repeating itself. To her parents, Cassandra was the tech support girl, the daughter who spent her life behind encrypted servers and architectural schematics while Sloane was the face of the Vance brand. They saw the bespoke, unbranded silk of Cassandra's dress and thought it was cheap. They saw her silence and thought it was submission. "The kitchen, Cassandra," Eleanor repeated, her voice dropping to a sharp, icy whisper. "Now." "Of course," Cassandra said. Her voice was calm, a low-frequency hum that didn't betray a flicker of the rage simmering beneath her ribs. As she turned to leave, her wrist brushed against the silk of her skirt, and a small, haptic vibration hummed against her skin. It was her watch, a custom-engineered piece of hardware that looked like a simple, vintage timepiece, but possessed more processing power than the entire ballroom's mobile devices combined. She glanced down at the sapphire crystal face. A single encrypted message from Julian Vane glowed in the corner. "The Sterling acquisition is finalized. The board has been bypassed. You now hold the majority stake in the parent infrastructure. The lion is awake." Cassandra felt a ghost of a smile touch her lips. She looked back at the head table, where Senator William Sterling was currently laughing at one of Sloane's vapid jokes. The senator was the key to the Vance's next expansion, the authority whose validation Sloane desperately craved for her charity foundation. He had no idea that the woman standing in the stained dress was the lead systems architect who had just quietly bought the very ground he was standing on. She moved through the crowd toward the service entrance. Marcus Thorne, the family's long-suffering butler, was already waiting by the heavy oak doors. He held a silver tray, but his eyes, the eyes of a man who had watched Cassandra grow up in the shadows of her sister's tantrums, were fixed on her with a knowing intensity. "The vintage gin is particularly difficult to remove from raw silk, Miss Cassandra," Marcus said, his voice a low rasp. He stepped closer, shielding her from the view of the ballroom as he handed her a linen cloth. "It doesn't matter, Marcus," she replied, taking the cloth but not using it on the dress. She leaned in, her voice barely a breath. "Did Julian send the files to the secure server?" "He did, and the senator's private ledger is being decrypted as we speak. Marcus's expression remained perfectly neutral, the mask of a loyal servant, but his hand tightened slightly on the tray. The Vance family trust is more fragile than your parents realize. They've been leveraging the infrastructure to fund Sloane's lifestyle for 3 years. Good, Cassandra said. She felt the cold dampness of the gin on her shoulder again, but this time it felt like an anchor grounding her. Let them keep filming. Let Sloane show the world exactly who she is tonight. And you, miss? Cassandra looked through the gap in the doors. At the center of the room, Sloane was standing on a chair, holding a glass of champagne high, her face glowing with the artificial light of a dozen ring lights. She looked powerful. She looked untouchable. I'm going to go to the server room, Cassandra said, her voice hardening into something sharp and final. I want to see the look on her face when the screens in this room stop showing her follower count and start showing the truth. She turned and walked down the service corridor, the sound of her own modest flats silent on the stone floor, while behind her the laughter of the elite continued. They thought the show was on the stage. They didn't realize the real power had just left the room. Cassandra pulled out her phone and tapped a single command. The countdown began. 2 days until the board meeting. 2 days until the Vance name belonged to her and her alone. She reached the heavy, reinforced door of the private study and placed her thumb on the scanner. The light turned green. Julian, she said into the darkness of the room as the servers hummed to life. Start the audit. I want every cent Sloane spent on that belt traced back to the employee pension fund. It's time to show my sister what loud luxury really costs. The next morning, the Vance estate was a hive of performative productivity. Cassandra Vance sat at the far end of the mahogany dining table, her tablet propped against a crystal vase of white lilies. The room smelled of expensive espresso and the faint, metallic tang of the silver polish used on the heirlooms. She watched Marcus Thorne move with practiced silence, pouring coffee with a steady hand that betrayed nothing of the secrets they now shared. The heavy oak doors swung open, and the peace vanished. Sloane Vance swept into the room, the sharp, aggressive clack of her designer stilettos echoing off the vaulted ceiling like a countdown. She was already dressed for the day in a neon-pink power suit that screamed for attention, her eyes glued to the screen of her phone as she checked the engagement metrics on her latest post. Marcus, tell the chef the egg whites were lukewarm yesterday, Sloane snapped, not looking up. I have the Sterling strategy meeting today, and I can't have my metabolism sluggish because of incompetent kitchen staff. She pulled out a chair, the wood scraping harshly against the marble floor. She finally glanced at her sister, her lip curling in a familiar expression of bored contempt. Still wearing that charcoal gray, Cassie? You look like a rainy day in a cubicle. It's a shame, really. With the Sterling family coming for the board preview tomorrow, you'd think you'd try to at least look like a Vance. Cassandra didn't look up from her screen. On the display, hidden behind a privacy filter, a red progress bar was crawling toward 90%. Julian Vane had spent the night dissecting the digital trail. The consulting fees Sloane had been charging to the company's infrastructure fund weren't just vanity expenses. They were a systematic hemorrhaging of the employee pension plan. I prefer to stay in the background, Sloane, Cassandra said, her voice calm and level. The view is often clearer from there. Sloane let out a sharp, mocking laugh. That's a comforting lie to tell yourself when you're irrelevant. Speaking of which, I'm taking the armored SUV today. My Ferrari is in the shop, and I need the presence of the black car service for my arrival at the club. I have a delivery scheduled for the server farm this morning, Cassandra replied, finally meeting her sister's gaze. I need the SUV for the equipment transport. You can take the sedan. Sloane froze, her fork hovering midair. The entitlement on her face shifted into a mask of pure outrage. The sedan, the one the housekeepers use. Are you joking? Cassandra, don't be difficult, Arthur Vance interjected, stepping into the room with a leaner Vance trailing behind him. Arthur adjusted his silk tie, his eyes fixed only on his golden child. Sloane is meeting with Senator William Sterling's daughter this afternoon. It's a vital networking opportunity for the family brand. Your technical errands can certainly wait. Alina nodded in rhythmic agreement, reaching out to pat Sloane's hand. Your father is right, dear. Sloane's image is the face of this family. We have to prioritize the things that actually bring value to the Vance name. You understand, don't you, Cassandra? The injustice was a familiar weight, but today it didn't feel heavy. It felt like fuel. Cassandra felt the cool, smooth surface of her tablet beneath her fingers, a secret weapon disguised as a mundane tool. She saw the way her parents looked at Sloane, with a desperate, hungry kind of pride, and the way they looked at her as if she were a piece of furniture that had been moved into the wrong room. Of course, Cassandra said, closing her tablet with a soft click. If the family brand is the priority, then Sloane should definitely have the SUV. Sloane smirked, tossing her hair over her shoulder. See, even the help understands eventually. Oh, and Cassie, don't bother coming to the club later. The senator prefers people who actually contribute to the economy, not just those who fix its routers. As the three of them began to discuss the guest list for the board meeting, their voices rising in a crescendo of vanity, Cassandra caught the eye of Marcus. The butler stood by the sideboard, his expression neutral, but he gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. She stood up, leaving her coffee untouched. She had seen enough. The audit was complete. Julian had sent the final confirmation. The down payment Sloane had just made on a private jet was tied directly to the pension fund's emergency reserve. I'll see you all at the board meeting tomorrow, Cassandra said quietly as she reached the door. Sloane didn't even look up from her phone. Whatever, Cassie. Just try to wear something that doesn't smell like a server room. Cassandra walked out into the hall, her heart beating with a cold, rhythmic precision. She pulled out her phone and sent a 3-word message to Julian. Release the subpoenas. She looked out the window as the black SUV pulled around the driveway to pick up Sloane. Her sister climbed in, waving to a camera she had set up on a tripod to film her boss babe departure. She had no idea that the vehicle she was so proud of was the last luxury she would ever claim from the Vance estate. The countdown wasn't in days anymore. It was in hours. And tomorrow, the price of prestige was going to be more than Sloane could ever afford to pay. 2 days had passed since Cassandra Vance had watched the black SUV disappear down the long, winding driveway of the family estate. The silence that followed had been a gift, a brief window to align the final pieces of a digital cage that was now humming with lethal intent. She sat in a corner booth of a glass-walled cafe overlooking the financial district, her fingers tracing the rim of a ceramic cup. The steam from her black coffee carried a bitter, earthy scent that grounded her. Julian Vane slid into the seat opposite her, placing a leather-bound folder on the table. He didn't offer a greeting. Their relationship was built on the efficiency of shared secrets. Julian was the only person who knew that the systems architect role Cassandra played was merely a convenient mask for the woman who owned the very servers he managed. The subpoenas were served an hour ago, Julian said, his voice a low vibration beneath the ambient noise of the cafe. The forensic audit of the Vance Trust is officially underway. I've secured the internal ledgers Sloane thought she'd encrypted behind that amateur firewall of hers. Cassandra opened the folder. Her eyes scanned the documents, the blueprint of her sister's downfall. There it was, in black and white. $3 million diverted from the family's charitable foundation into a holding company used to pay for Sloane's boss babe lifestyle. The leased Ferraris, the designer wardrobe, the performative gala donations, all of it was fueled by theft. She didn't just skim, Cassandra whispered, the cold precision of her mind already calculating the legal fallout. She gutted the foundation's liquidity. If the board sees this, she's not just out of the company. She's looking at a felony. The board meeting is in 24 hours, Julian reminded her. Senator William Sterling is flying in for it. He's expecting a presentation on the new infrastructure if he sees these records instead. He'll pull his investment, Cassandra finished, and the Vance name will be synonymous with fraud. She felt a sharp, metallic tang of anticipation. For years, she had been the invisible support beam holding up a house that didn't want her. Tomorrow, she would simply step aside and let the rot do its work. The glass door of the cafe swung open, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. The scent of an overpowering, expensive floral perfume, something with a price tag that could feed a family for a month, preceded the arrival. Sloane Vance marched in, her heels clicking against the polished concrete like a metronome of arrogance. She was draped in a trench coat heavy with gold-toned logos, her phone held out like a scepter as she filmed herself for her followers. "And here we are, guys," Sloane said to her camera, ignoring the other patrons. "Taking a quick break from saving the empire to grab a latte. Real leadership never sleeps." She spotted Cassandra and Julian. A smirk, sharp and practiced, twisted her lips. She didn't stop filming as she approached their table. "Oh, look," Sloane cooed to her audience, pointing the lens at Cassandra's modest, unbranded navy sweater. "My sister is having a little playdate with the help. Is this a secret IT meeting, or are you two just comparing pocket protectors?" Julian stiffened, but Cassandra remained perfectly still. She didn't look at the camera. She didn't even look at Sloane. She simply took a slow, methodical sip of her coffee. Sloane leaned over the table, her shadow falling across the folder. "You know, Cassie, I was thinking about your little office back at the house. Once I'm confirmed as the new chair tomorrow, I'm turning that wing into a content studio. I've already hired the decorators. You can move your servers to the basement, or the garage, somewhere you won't be seen." "The board hasn't voted yet, Sloane," Cassandra said, her voice a calm, level contrast to her sister's performative energy. Sloane laughed, a brittle, entitled sound that made a nearby businessman wince. "The vote is a formality. Mom and Dad have already lobbied the senator. I'm the face of this brand. You're just the wiring in the walls, and nobody looks at the wiring until it shorts out." Sloane reached out, her manicured fingers plucking a sugar packet from the table. She tore it open and let the white crystals rain down into Cassandra's coffee. "Sweeten up, Cassie. You look like you're at a funeral." "Though I guess in a way, you are." She turned back to her phone, flashing a brilliant, hollow smile. "Anyway, stay tuned for the gala reveal tomorrow night. It's going to be legendary." As Sloane strutted away, her laughter echoing off the glass walls, Julian reached for a napkin to wipe a stray grain of sugar from the table. "How do you do it?" he asked, his voice tight with reflected rage. "How do you let her speak to you like that?" Cassandra looked down at her ruined coffee. The sugar had vanished into the black liquid, invisible but present, much like her own influence. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, encrypted USB drive, the final piece of evidence Marcus Thorne had recovered from the Home Office. It contained the recorded conversation of Sloane admitting she had falsified the Foundation's year-end reports. "Because I know something she doesn't," Cassandra said, her voice dropping to a temperature that felt like a warning. "And what's that?" Cassandra stood up, leaving the coffee untouched. She adjusted the cuff of her bespoke, unbranded sleeve, a fabric so rare it wasn't sold in any store Sloane had ever entered. "She thinks she's the one holding the scissors," Cassandra said, looking toward the door where her sister had vanished. "She hasn't realized yet that she's the one standing in the middle of the red ribbon, and tomorrow I'm going to enjoy the cut." She walked out of the cafe, the cool afternoon air hitting her face. The countdown was no longer in hours. It was in heartbeats. She felt the weight of the USB drive in her palm, a digital guillotine ready to drop. 2 days of preparation were over. The blueprint was complete. All that remained was the execution. The evening before the Vance Foundation Gala felt like the heavy, electric stillness before a hurricane. Cassandra Vance stood in the library of the family estate, the scent of old paper and rain-dampened earth drifting through the open window. She wasn't looking at the guest list anymore. Instead, her fingers traced the edge of a small, silver USB drive, the digital blade she would unsheath in less than 24 hours. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner seemed to count down not in seconds, but in the heartbeats of an empire about to collapse. Sloane Vance swept into the room, a whirlwind of neon pink silk and artificial lilies. She was draped in a designer wrap that looked more like a cry for attention than a garment, the fabric rustling loudly against the quiet dignity of the mahogany shelves. "Still brooding, Cassie. Honestly, the gala is tomorrow and you look like you're attending a funeral." Cassandra didn't look up immediately. She waited for the scent of her sister's cloying, over-applied perfume to settle. "In a way, I suppose I am." "Don't be dramatic, it's my big night. Senator William Sterling is coming specifically to see the impact of my leadership." Sloane leaned over the desk, her manicured nails clicking sharply against the polished wood. "I've already decided. After the gala, I'm moving your office to the basement. We need the upstairs space for my new media team. Besides, someone with your aesthetic shouldn't be seen by the high-level donors." Cassandra finally met her sister's gaze. Her eyes were calm, a deep contrast to the frantic energy radiating from the other woman. "Sloane, I'm going to give you one chance. The year-end reports for the foundation. There is a massive discrepancy in the allocation of the charity funds. If you come clean tonight, if you tell the board there was a clerical error and return the diverted money, the fallout might be manageable." Sloane let out a sharp, jagged laugh that grated against the silence of the room. "Discrepancy? You mean the creative accounting that bought my new studio and the lease on the Ferrari? It's called branding, Cassie. It's an investment in the Vance name. Not that you'd understand. You've always been too small-minded to see the big picture. You're just the help with a shared last name." "I'm warning you," Cassandra said, her voice dropping to a temperature that should have made her sister shiver. "Tomorrow night, the senator will be looking at those numbers very closely." "Let him look," she snapped, adjusting her wrap with a dismissive flick of her wrist. "He's an investor in my vision, not your spreadsheets." Arthur and a leaner Vance appeared in the doorway, their faces glowing with the reflected light of their favorite daughter's perceived brilliance. "There you are, Sloane," a leaner said, stepping into the room and ignoring Cassandra entirely. "The florist called. The centerpieces are magnificent. You really have a gift for this, darling. The elegance you've brought to this family is unmatched." "Arthur," Cassandra said, looking at her father, "did you look at the internal audit I flagged on your desk this morning?" Arthur Vance sighed, a sound of profound disappointment that had become the soundtrack of Cassandra's life. "Cassandra, please, not tonight. Stop trying to tear your sister down just because she's achieved more in 6 months than you have in 6 years. We know you're talented with the technical side of things, but Sloane has the vision. Let her shine without your constant, jealous interference." "It isn't jealousy, Father. It's a liability." "The only liability in this room is your attitude," Arthur replied, turning his back on her to admire the gala invitation a leaner held. The card was thick, embossed with gold leaf that felt vulgar in its excess. Cassandra felt the weight of the drive in her pocket. Her phone buzzed silently. A message from Julian Vane appeared on the screen. "The senator's private server is linked to the ballroom display. The presentation is locked. There is no turning back." She watched her parents and sister walk out of the library, their laughter echoing down the hallway. They were so blinded by the loud luxury. Sloane flaunted that they couldn't see the structural rot beneath their feet. Marcus Thorne stepped from the shadows of the hallway, placing a fresh cup of Earl Grey on the desk. The steam rose in a gentle curl, the scent of bergamot cutting through the heavy perfume lingering in the air. "The car is scheduled for 7 a.m., Miss Vance," the butler said softly. "Thank you, Marcus. She has no idea, does she?" he asked, his eyes moving to the doorway where the others had vanished. "None," Cassandra replied, taking a slow sip of the tea. The warmth was steady, just like her hand. "She thinks she's walking onto a stage to receive a crown. She hasn't realized yet that the stage is a trapdoor, and I'm the one with my hand on the lever." She looked out at the rain hitting the windowpane. The countdown was over. Tomorrow, the Vance name would mean something entirely different. She reached out and extinguished the desk lamp, leaving the room in total darkness. The evening of the Sterling Gala arrived with a crisp, biting cold that seemed to sharpen the edges of the city's skyline. Inside the grand ballroom of the Sterling estate, however, the air was thick with the suffocating scent of gardenias and the metallic tang of expensive floor wax. Crystal chandeliers hummed with a low electric vibration, casting a fractured light over the sea of silk and wool. Cassandra Vance stood near the periphery of the room, her fingers lightly tracing the smooth, cool edge of the midnight blue silk of her gown. The fabric was bespoke, hand-stitched by a tailor in Milan who didn't believe in labels, only in the architecture of a perfect silhouette. She looked like a shadow moving through a room of neon lights, quiet and intentional. In her small, unbranded clutch, the weight of a single encrypted flash drive felt heavier than a bar of gold. Across the room, the noise level spiked. Sloane Vance had arrived, and she was making sure the entire tri-state area knew it. She was draped in a gown that was less a garment and more a billboard for a French fashion house, the logos embroidered in gold thread that caught the light with every performative gesture. She moved like a hurricane of lace and entitlement, trailed by Arthur and a leaner Vance, who walked 3 steps behind her like royal attendants. "Oh, look," Sloane said, her voice cutting through the polite murmur of the string quartet as she spotted her sister. She didn't approach so much as she invaded Cassandra's space, the smell of her cloying, over-applied perfume hitting like a physical blow. "I see you decided to come after all, though I'm surprised security didn't stop you at the door. That dress, is it vintage or just unfinished?" A few socialites nearby paused their conversations, their eyes darting between the 2 sisters. This was the sport they lived for, the public dissection of status. "It's comfortable, Sloane," Cassandra replied, her voice a calm, steady anchor against her sister's turbulence. She didn't flinch, didn't look away. She simply observed the way Sloane's heavy makeup settled into the fine lines around her eyes, a mask starting to crack under the pressure of its own vanity. "Comfortable." "How charmingly middle-class of you," Sloane sneered, loud enough for a passing waiter to stumble. She turned to her mother, her lip curling. "Mother, did we really have to bring her? She's going to ruin the family photos for the press. She looks like a librarian who got lost on her way to a funeral." Eleanor sighed, her eyes avoiding Cassandra's. "She's your sister, Sloane. Just try to keep her in the background. We can't have her upsetting the senator before the announcement." Arthur nodded, adjusting his cufflinks with a nervous twitch. "Right, the senator is the priority tonight. Sloane, darling, remember what we discussed. Focus on the expansion. Don't let your sisters, lack of ambition, distract you." Cassandra watched them, a small, cold smile playing at the corners of her mouth. They were so blinded by the gold leaf on the walls that they couldn't see the structural rot in the foundations. She caught the eye of Marcus Thorne, who was stationed near the Champagne Tower. He gave her a nearly imperceptible nod, his gloved hand resting briefly on the breast pocket of his livery where his own phone sat, ready to record. The crowd suddenly parted like the Red Sea as Senator William Sterling entered the room. He was a man who radiated the kind of power that didn't need to shout, the exact opposite of Sloane. He moved with a practiced grace, shaking hands and nodding with the calculated warmth of a career politician. Sloane practically vibrated with predatory intent. She adjusted her gown, checked her reflection in a nearby champagne flute, and marched toward him. "Senator Sterling, what a magnificent evening." "I was just telling my father how much your vision for the city's tech infrastructure aligns with the Vance legacy." The senator smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Ah, Sloane, always a pleasure. And your family, I heard there was some internal restructuring recently." Sloane laughed, a brittle, high-pitched sound. "Oh, nothing to worry about. We're just trimming the dead wood. My sister, Cassandra, for instance, she's been trying her hand at some little coding projects. But I'm afraid she's just not built for the high-stakes world of systems architecture. She's more of a support staff personality." Cassandra, who had drifted closer to the conversation, felt the familiar sting of her sister's dismissal. But this time it was followed by a surge of pure, crystalline adrenaline. She wasn't the victim anymore. She was the architect of the coming collapse. "Is that so?" the senator asked, his gaze shifting past Sloane to land directly on Cassandra. His eyebrows rose in genuine curiosity. Before Sloane could double down on the insult, a tall man in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit stepped out from the shadows of a marble pillar. Julian Vane moved with the quiet authority of a man who held the keys to the kingdom. He ignored Sloane entirely, stepping directly to Cassandra's side. "The servers are live, and the final audit is complete," Julian whispered, though in the sudden hush of the nearby circle, the words seemed to echo. "Everything is ready for your signal." Sloane's face contorted in confusion. "Julian, what are you doing talking to her? And what servers? I'm the one you should be reporting to." Julian turned his head slightly, giving Sloane a look of such profound indifference that she actually stepped back. "I report to the owner of Vane Systems, Sloane. I thought that was made clear in the filings." "Exactly," Sloane snapped, her face flushing a deep, angry crimson. "And as the future head of the Vance estate, that would be me." "Wait for it," Cassandra murmured, her voice so low only Julian could hear. The senator watched the exchange with a sharpened interest, his eyes darting between the two sisters. He sensed the shift in the room, the way the atmosphere had suddenly become electric, charged with a tension that threatened to shatter the crystal in the chandeliers. "Senator," Cassandra said, stepping forward. Her voice was no longer the quiet hum of a background character. It was the clear, ringing tone of a woman who owned the room. "I believe you were looking for the lead architect on the new municipal security grid, the one who identified the 42 separate vulnerabilities in the current Vance proposal." Sloane's jaw dropped. "What are you talking about? You don't know anything about the grid. You're a failure. You're nothing." Cassandra didn't look at her. She kept her eyes locked on Senator Sterling. "The announcement you're about to make, Senator. I think you'll find the data on this drive much more illuminating than the legacy my sister has been pitching you." The senator looked at the flash drive Cassandra held out, then at the frantic, sweating face of Sloane Vance. The room had gone deathly silent. Even the string quartet had stopped playing. "The gala is just beginning," the senator said, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across his face. He signaled to his aide. "Let's get the projector ready. I think it's time we see exactly what the Vance legacy is made of." Sloane lunged forward, her hand outstretched to grab the drive, but Marcus Thorne was suddenly there, his large frame forming an immovable wall between the sisters. "Careful, Miss Sloane," Marcus said softly, his voice like velvet over gravel. "You wouldn't want to make a scene in front of the senator. It would be so middle class." Cassandra turned her back on her sister's panicked gasps, walking toward the stage with Julian at her side. The trapdoor was open. All she had to do was wait for the first step. The hum of the projector fan was the only sound in the cavernous ballroom, a low, mechanical drone that seemed to vibrate against the crystal flutes of champagne. Cassandra Vance didn't blink as the lights dimmed, casting the room into a predatory gloom. Beside her, she could hear Sloane Vance's ragged breathing, a sharp contrast to the practiced poise the younger sister had maintained all evening. The scent of Sloane's cloying, over-applied perfume, something rare and suffocating, hung heavy in the air. "Wait," Sloane hissed, her voice a jagged whisper that carried to the front row where Senator William Sterling sat. She reached for the laptop, her manicured nails clicking frantically against the metal casing. "There's a mistake. This isn't the right file." "It's exactly the right file," Julian Vane said, stepping out from the shadows near the stage. He didn't look at Sloane. His eyes were fixed on the senator. He gave a sharp nod to the technician. The screen didn't flicker with the curated montage of Sloane's charitable works or the Vance family's gilded history. Instead, a series of high-resolution documents scrolled into view. They were architectural schematics for the global infrastructure the senator had been praising all night, but the metadata in the corner told the real story. Author, Cassandra Vance. Patent holder, Cassandra Vance. Ownership stake, 82%. A collective gasp rippled through the audience like a physical wave. Arthur and Alina Vance sat frozen in their front row seats, their faces pale masks of incomprehension. Arthur's hand shook so violently that his wine glass rattled against the arm of his chair, a rhythmic, metallic tapping that underscored the silence. Sloane's transformation was visceral. The curated, influencer-perfect mask she had worn since childhood didn't just slip, it disintegrated. The high-definition light from the projector washed her out, turning her skin a sickly, translucent gray. Her eyes, usually wide with performative innocence, shrank into terrified pinpoints, darting frantically from the screen to the senator's stony expression. A fine tremor started at the corner of her mouth, pulling her lip upward in a grotesque, involuntary twitch that exposed her teeth. Her throat worked in visible, frantic gulps, her chest heaving so hard the delicate lace of her bodice began to fray at the seams. She looked smaller, suddenly, the expensive silk of her gown no longer a suit of armor but a shroud. The arrogance that had defined her for 24 years vanished, replaced by a raw, naked panic that made her look like a cornered animal, realizing the cage door was locked from the outside. "Cassie, what is this?" Eleanor whispered, her voice cracking as she looked at her daughter. You're just the systems manager. You told us you were just an employee." "No," Cassandra said, her voice cutting through the murmurs with the precision of a scalpel. "You told me I was just an employee. You chose to believe the lie because it was easier than admitting I was the one keeping this family from insolvency." Senator William Sterling stood slowly, his shadow lengthening across the screen. He looked at the documents, then at the trembling Sloane, and finally at Cassandra. The respect in his eyes was cold and absolute. "It seems," the senator said, his voice echoing in the rafters, "that I've been talking to the wrong Miss Vance all night." Sloane lunged toward Cassandra, her fingers clawing at the air, her voice a shrill, broken shriek that echoed off the marble walls. "She stole it! She hacked the files! Dad, tell them she's lying!" Arthur Vance didn't move. He couldn't even meet his daughter's eyes. He stared at the floor, the weight of a decade of enabling finally crushing his shoulders. Cassandra turned away from the chaos, her expression as calm as a frozen lake. She signaled to Marcus Thorne, who was already waiting by the double mahogany doors with her coat. The heavy scent of floor wax and expensive lilies followed her as she crossed the floor, the sound of her unbranded, bespoke heels steady and rhythmic. She stopped at the exit and looked back one last time at the sister who had spent a lifetime trying to bury her. Sloane was on her knees now, clutching at the senator's sleeve, her desperate pleas falling on deaf ears as security moved in to quietly escort her from the stage. "You always said I didn't belong in your world, Sloane," Cassandra said, the words falling like stones into a well. "You were right, because as of tonight, I'm the one who owns it. You have until noon tomorrow to clear out of my house." She didn't wait for the scream that followed. She stepped through the doors and into the cool, silent night, leaving the wreckage of the Vance legacy behind her. 10 minutes after the heavy mahogany doors had closed behind Cassandra Vance, the ballroom remained trapped in a vacuum of shocked silence. The air, once thick with the scent of expensive lilies and the self-congratulatory hum of the elite, now felt stagnant and cold. At the center of the wreckage stood Sloane Vance, the woman who had spent the last decade treating the world as her personal stage and her sister as a footstool. The mask didn't just slip, it shattered. Sloane's face underwent a violent, visceral transformation as the reality of her sister's words began to permeate her carefully curated delusion. Her skin, usually a perfect, bronzed canvas of expensive serums and professional lighting, turned a sickly, translucent gray, making the heavy contouring on her cheekbones look like bruises. Her eyes, once sharp with predatory intent, darted around the room like a trapped animal's, wide and bloodshot, searching for a single sympathetic face. Her jaw worked soundlessly, her carefully lined lips trembling and pulling back into a grotesque snarl that revealed the desperate, animalistic panic beneath her polished exterior. She looked suddenly aged, her features sagging under the weight of a truth that had stripped her of her only currency: status. "She's lying," Sloane finally wheezed, the sound like a rusted hinge. She looked toward the head of the table, her hands trembling so violently that the diamonds on her fingers caught the light in frantic, jagged flashes. "Senator, you can't possibly believe." Senator William Sterling didn't just step back. He recoiled as if she were a biohazard. He adjusted his cufflinks with a sharp, final click, his expression shifting from mild amusement to a cold, professional disgust. "I believe in balance sheets and property deeds, Sloane," he said, his voice carrying the weight of a gavel. "And if what Julian Vane says is true, you've been living in a house of cards, one that I have no intention of being buried under." Beside him, Julian Vane stepped forward, his tailored suit a sharp contrast to the crumbling figures before him. He held a leather-bound folder with the quiet authority of a man who held the keys to the kingdom. "It isn't just the house, Senator," Julian said, his voice smooth and terrifyingly calm. "Cassandra's firm has been the silent majority stakeholder in the Vance legacy assets for 3 years. Every cent Sloane has spent on loud luxury was essentially a high-interest loan from the sister she ridiculed." The sound of a glass shattering echoed through the hall. Eleanor Vance had dropped her champagne flute, the vintage liquid soaking into the hem of her designer gown. She didn't notice. Her eyes were fixed on Arthur Vance, who was already shifting his weight, his gaze drifting toward the exit Cassandra had used. "We had no idea," Arthur stammered, his reedy voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. He didn't look at Sloane. He looked at Julian, his eyes gleaming with a sudden opportunistic hunger. "Cassandra always was the bright one. We were just misled by Sloane's accounts of the situation. We've always been so proud of our eldest." Sloane turned on her father, her breath coming in shallow, ragged hitches. You encouraged me. You told me she was a charity case." "I told you to be prudent," Arthur snapped, his voice cold. He was already distancing himself from the sinking ship of his youngest daughter's reputation. "If you've misappropriated family funds, that's on your head, Sloane." The betrayal was the final blow. Sloane looked around the room and saw not friends or peers, but witnesses to her extinction. The board members who had laughed at her jokes moments ago were now angling their bodies away from her in a collective, silent shunning. Even the waitstaff moved with a new, rigid purpose, clearing her place setting as if erasing her very existence from the table. An hour later, the cool night air did nothing to soothe the heat of Sloane's rage as she stepped out of her leased Ferrari in front of the Vance estate. The gravel crunched under her heels, the sound of something being ground into dust. She expected the house to be dark, a silent monument to her former glory. Instead, the front doors were wide open, spilling light onto the manicured lawn. Marcus Thorne stood on the threshold, his posture as impeccable as ever, his gloved hands clasped behind his back. Beside him sat 3 large, industrial-grade storage bins. "What is this?" Sloane demanded, her voice shrill, echoing off the stone pillars. "Get my bags inside, I have a headache." "I'm afraid that won't be possible," Marcus replied, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. He didn't move to help her. He didn't even look at her. His gaze was fixed somewhere over her shoulder. "The locks were changed 20 minutes ago. These bins contain your personal effects, clothing, cosmetics, and the various electronics you've used to document your lifestyle. You can't do this," she screamed, lunging toward the door. Marcus didn't flinch, but a shadow fell over the doorway. Cassandra Vance stepped into the light. She wasn't wearing the modest, unbranded silk from the gala. She had changed into a simple, bespoke black turtleneck and trousers, her hair pulled back. She looked like the architect of a new world, one where Sloane had no place. "I can," Cassandra said, her voice dropping like a stone into a deep well. She held a single sheet of paper, the court-ordered eviction notice, signed and stamped. "You always said I didn't belong in your world, Sloane. You were right. Because in my world, people work for what they have. They don't steal it from the people who love them." "Cassie, please," Sloane sobbed, the transition to victimhood as fast as it was hollow. She reached out, her fingers clawing at the air. "We're sisters. You can't leave me on the street." "I'm not leaving you on the street," Cassandra replied, her eyes as hard as flint. "I've paid for a month at a modest long-stay motel near the airport. It's clean, it's quiet, and most importantly, it's all you can afford. Marcus has the address." Cassandra stepped back into the foyer, the warmth of the house framing her silhouette. "You have until the count of 10 to get your bins off my porch, Sloane. After that, I'm calling the security team I now employ." Sloane stood on the driveway, the smell of damp earth and her own expensive, cloying perfume filling her lungs. She looked at the bins, then at the sister who had finally stopped playing the victim. Behind her, the headlights of a waiting taxi cut through the dark, a humble yellow sedan that looked like a tombstone for her social life. "One," Cassandra began, her voice steady and rhythmic. Sloane grabbed the handle of the first bin, the plastic cold and cheap against her palms. As the heavy oak doors began to swing shut, she caught one last glimpse of the foyer, the Vance family crest being taken down from the wall by a workman. The legacy was gone. And as the lock clicked into place with a final metallic thud, Sloane realized for the first time that the silence wasn't just in the house. It was the sound of the entire world turning its back on her. 6 months had passed since the locks were changed at the Vance estate, and the silence that followed had become Cassandra Vance's most expensive luxury. She sat in her new corner office on the 42nd floor of the Vane Systems headquarters, the city of Chicago sprawling beneath her like a circuit board she had finally learned to program. There were no logos on her walls, no gold-plated trinkets on her desk. Instead, the room smelled of rain-dampened cedar, and the faint, ozone scent of the massive server banks hummed behind a reinforced glass partition. She ran a hand over the edge of her desk, solid obsidian, cool and unyielding, and felt a sense of equilibrium she hadn't known in a decade. The door chimes signaled a visitor, and Julian Vane stepped inside. He looked every bit the corporate lion, his suit tailored to a razor's edge, yet he inclined his head toward her with genuine deference. He placed a leather-bound folder on her desk, the heavy paper crinkling under his touch. "The quarterly integration is complete," he said, his voice a calm baritone that cut through the low hum of the office. "Senator William Sterling called this morning to confirm his lead investment in the new infrastructure project. He mentioned that the board hasn't seen this kind of stability in 20 years. You've done it, Cassandra." She nodded, her expression unreadable. "And the legacy accounts." Julian hesitated, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. He pulled a tablet from his pocket and tapped the screen before sliding it across the obsidian surface. "I thought you might want to see the final audit of the social fallout. It seems the digital world has a very short memory for those who lose their luster." Cassandra looked down at the screen. It was a grainy, handheld video taken at a high-end department store's discount outlet in the suburbs. In the center of the frame stood Sloane Vance, though she was barely recognizable. The loud luxury was gone, replaced by a pilled, polyester uniform vest with a name tag pinned crookedly to the lapel. Her hair, once professionally maintained with her sister's stolen money, was pulled back in a jagged, frizzy ponytail. She was currently being berated by an elderly woman over a coupon for $5 off a pair of irregular hosiery. "I used to have 1 million followers." Sloane's voice came through the speakers, shrill and desperate, cracking with a familiar, entitled rage. "I'm a Vance, you can't talk to me like this. I don't care if you're the Queen of Sheba," the customer snapped, waving the coupon in her face. "Just scan the damn barcode, girl. I've been waiting 10 minutes. Cassandra watched as her sister's face collapsed, not into tears, but into a hollow, haunting mask of realization. Sloane reached for the scanner, her movements robotic, her eyes fixed on the linoleum floor. The sleeping lion had not just woken up. She had moved on, leaving the predator to become the prey of a world that didn't care about her pedigree. "The parents?" Cassandra asked, sliding the tablet back. "Arthur and Alina Vance have settled into the 2-bedroom condo in Florida," Julian replied. "The one Marcus Thorne managed to secure before the creditors circled the main estate. It's modest. No staff, no marble. Your father spends most of his time at the local library, and your mother has stopped answering the door for anyone who doesn't have a delivery package. They sent another letter last week." "Did you open it?" "No," Julian said. "As per your instructions, it was returned to sender, unopened." Cassandra stood and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. The late afternoon sun caught the subtle shimmer of her charcoal silk blouse. She had won. The infrastructure of the Vance name was hers, the wealth was secured, and the people who had treated her like a footstool were now struggling to keep their heads above the rising tide of their own insignificance. A soft knock at the door preceded Marcus Thorne, who entered carrying a tray with a single cup of Earl Grey. The old butler had traded his livery for a sharp, charcoal blazer, serving now as Cassandra's personal estate manager. He set the tea down with the same precision he had used for 30 years, but his eyes held a warmth that had been absent during the long years of Sloane's reign. "The car is ready, Miss Vance," Marcus said softly. "The foundation gala begins at 7. Senator Sterling is expecting you for the opening remarks." "Thank you, Marcus," she said, turning away from the window. As she prepared to leave, her gaze fell on a small, framed photograph on her bookshelf. It wasn't of her parents or her sister. It was a picture of the old Vance estate's garden, taken from the perspective of the servants' entrance where she used to hide to study. She realized then that the victory wasn't in the money or the office. It was in the fact that she no longer had to hide. But as she walked toward the elevator, the weight of the silence in the hallway pressed against her. She had the crown, but the family tree had been burned to the ground to forge it. She was the most powerful woman in the room, yet she was also the only one in the room. It was a fair trade, she told herself. A necessary one. The elevator doors slid shut with a soft, metallic click, leaving the penthouse in a state of perfect, expensive isolation. Cassandra caught her reflection in the polished steel, a woman who owned everything but belonged to no one. She straightened her shoulders, adjusted her unbranded cuffs, and stepped out into the lobby, where the world was waiting to applaud the woman they finally knew was in charge.
I hope you enjoyed this tale. Please subscribe to support the channel. Goodbye for now.